everybody, welcome back to part 3 of my Atari arcade ports. And I told you in one of the last videos I was going to play on real hardware on a real TV and try and capture it, and that's what I'm going to do today. So you can see what this really looked like back in the day when you were playing an Atari. The sounds, the look off of CRT, so you really get that feel of what it was like back in the 70s and 80s. And, you know, maybe people think the Atari 2600 is a little outdated by now, but being that I was a child back then, I can think of these games and feel, oh, this would have been great to have, or this really stinks no matter when it came out. So, doing 11 at a time here, and we're starting out with Venture on this one. And Venture is wonderful, and this series that I'm going to play today really brings back some memories. And there was a very unique arcade down in the alternate mall where we lived in town. We had the Lewiston Mall, the primary mall kind of, and then there was the Promenade Mall across the street. And it was like the B Mall, and it didn't have the anchor store like Sears in there, but it had a Bradley's. There was a Service Merchandise, and there was also a Radio Shack in that mall. So it was a pretty great B-list mall. The Promenade Mall had this area in behind the mall. If you drove around the back or walked down this really steep, wide staircase just past Bradley's, there was a movie theater there. And there was an arcade there, too, called Goliath's Arcade. I may have mentioned it before, but it was so unique because it had everything the other arcades didn't have. And Venture is one of those games that I would go there to play. It was difficult, lots of levels. Now, this version only has 2 of the boards, and each board has 4 screens. And while this doesn't stack up to say something like even the ColecoVision version with the depth that has, this is a pretty decent port. It's just a bit repetitive. But as we know, space was a big factor, the cost of storage. They would not spend the money on an arcade port to give extra levels if they didn't have to. So this is one of the Coleco carts, and the Coleco carts generally did the bare minimum. Even though they did a good job on the actual games, they could have done so much better by adding additional levels, but they kind of cheaped out. But Venture, it's a pretty solid game for what it is, as long as you keep your expectations in check. So there you go. There's the first one on the list. I still recommend it. Any of these games that you can get usually for $3.99, $2.99, stuff like that out in the wild, it's well worth it, because you can definitely get a few hours of entertainment out of any of these. All right. Here we are next. Mr. Do. Mr. Do was down at Action Family Arcade, along with where earlier I said Dig Dug. That was the ones that were in the Laverdier drugstores, or like they're more like a modern day Rite Aid or something. Laverdiers own these. They were called Action Family Arcades, and Mr. Do was in that, and I played that a lot there. That was the one of the games that was the destination to go to. I'd play Mr. Do, and I would play Dig Dug there. So Mr. Do, this is another one where what they were able to do was pretty good, and there's lots of levels on this, so it makes it really fun. Now, the tricky part is the monsters are very aggressive in this, and you have a hard time getting away from them. Plus, you can't leave channels all the time to walk through, like maze channels where they can't get to you. They kind of stick to a grid, but they can come across and get you because everything just ends up wide open while you're clearing out stuff. And the ball kind of goes in zany ways, but honestly, if you wanted to play Mr. Do at home, this was pretty good. And even though it was a little more challenging, I think it holds up pretty well considering the limitations of the system. So that's Mr. Do. Another one, if you get it for a good deal, I recommend it. Next, we got Zaxon. Now, Zaxon is famous for having that, skewed look. I don't know if that's quite isometric on this or whatnot, but also the height meters, and you got to fly through holes in the wall and stuff in the arcade, and you got to be on the same level as the characters to shoot them. This translates horribly to the Atari. Now, maybe I just don't play it enough, but I could not figure out how to get myself lined up right. And definitely, like, if I had to fly over a wall or something, I'd go all the way up almost, because I wasn't sure if I was up enough. Now, as you get close to the wall, you start seeing the color change on the left, but it's a little too late by then. You either got to be over it or not. And then once it gets to, trying to shoot things, all I could really do is know when I'm low on the ground, I'm going to be able to shoot things. But once I get up in the air a little bit, I have no idea what my height is. And sometimes I feel like I'm at the same size as the other characters, or my shadow's right, and I'm still not shooting them. So again, Zaxon, it's a good effort in a way to try to encapsulate that 3D kind of feel to it. The up and down, your X, Y, Z in space and time. Just doesn't work for me. I had a hard time with this. This one I don't recommend. But again, if you find it for $1, definitely worth picking up. All right, next we got Mousetrap, another Exidy game. This one, it's hard to compete with the arcade because you had 3 colored buttons and different colored doors to open while you run around the maze. And then you had the changing to the dog button after you got some bones. So, while this is just a shadow of the arcade game, it really does have the good feel of what you need to do. And I do like how they were able to, if you hit the button quick, you turn into the dog if you got a bone. If you hold it for a second down, it will change your doors. So they open and close. And while you're not controlling 3 separate types of doors based on the colors, I think they were red, blue, and green colored doors. So while you just have one style of doors, it actually works pretty good on here. Now, I wish they would have done a little something extra, like change up the maze or something, just to keep it a little fresher. But they do get a little more aggressive over time, so it does get harder and harder to play. It's just the cats move around quicker. And, what can I say? Again, another game where it's not going to compete with the arcade directly, and it can't compete with, say, another ColecoVision title. They were probably coming out around the same time because they were making cartridges for Atari at the same time. And they always seem to be making a better edition for their ColecoVision. But this, for what it is on the Atari, it handles pretty well, and after playing for a few minutes, I get really used to the controls, so it's not a problem. The one thing that's weird, and I can't remember if it's in the arcade game, we're talking about a game I played back in the 80s, so it's hard to recall. Another one that was at Goliath's Arcade behind the Promenade Mall. It's just as good as they probably could have done without complicating it, because you've only got one button on the Atari controller, and that's that. So just to be able to put 2 functions into that one button is a big win for me when you're playing on an Atari 2600 system. So this is a conversion I give a thumbs up. This is worth giving a go. All right, now we're on to one of the big games of Nintendo's early era, and that's Popeye. I think most people know that they tried to get the Popeye license. They couldn't get it. Miyamoto ended up designing Donkey Kong instead. Then they eventually got the Popeye license. So I think Popeye was supposed to be more similar to Donkey Kong than it is to what Popeye is now. But Popeye is pretty good. The pace is a little slow because it takes so long to collect all the hearts and the music notes. But they did a good job. They did a real good job on this. You don't see the sea hag, but the bottles come out at you. Bluto throws out bottles. The hearts and stuff move. You got all 3 levels. What more can you ask from a port? So this is one of the higher quality arcade ports you're going to find on an Atari 2600. And this is a Parker Brothers conversion here. Popeye is fun because it holds true to the arcade more than most arcade ports. All right, next we got Q-Bert. Q-Bert is just one of those games that I would play a little bit. I can't remember where Q-Bert was most of the time. It's kind of fuzzy. I don't remember what arcade it was in. It could have been any one of the arcades in the area that, more than likely it was one that was in the Goliath's Arcade, because it's hard to remember. Certain arcades had deals with certain vendors sometimes, so you might not see certain games in that arcade. And I just feel like Q-Bert's so fuzzy to me, I can't remember where it showed up. But it was in a few different places. Let's just say that. So it doesn't stand out as being an exclusive anywhere. And it's a lot easier to play Q-Bert in the arcade because of the angle of the joystick. You're doing the diagonals. Now, it works out pretty well on the Atari because you just twist the controller and you're playing on the angles. You know, you're still pushing up, down, left, and right, but you just twist it and it feels like you're doing the up, down, left, and right at the proper angles. By putting the fire button at the top, it lines it up perfectly. So that helps the gameplay immensely. And you know, this is another really good conversion. This is Parker Brothers too. So they were doing their very best to make good conversions. When, you know, Coleco, even though they were doing good, they were kind of scaling it back a little bit, and they were probably just trying to save money on memory and storage. But Parker Brothers was going all out on a couple of these, and I really appreciate the quality they had on these. But again, a Q-Bert, not a game I love, but a game I love having, because finding this probably was closer to a $5 game when I found it out in the wild. But that's okay. You know, it's a little more rare, so it was worth it. And not something I'd spend, you know, 10 or 15 bucks on, which is probably what it costs on eBay. But for, you know, under $5, it's great to have in the collection. All right, here we have an Atari port, Berzerk. This is a pretty solid conversion. It's got all, and you can change the difficulty on Berzerk. So you can make it a little easier, or you can make it so Evil Otto comes out and you can shoot him if you need. I think there's some versions of this that you can't shoot him. He's going to get you no matter what. But then you can, you know, look up in the manual. There's manuals online. It'll tell you which difficulty mode you're in. Sometimes they used to use the difficulty A and B switches, but then they got to the point where they got rid of those on some of the Ataris. You just had, instead of like the Sixers or the heavy Sixers, you just had 4 switches. So they just started changing to game variations. You just select game 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. So you can change that and change how difficult Berzerk is. And it really can be very intense. It can be very easy at first, or it can get very intense quick. And then you have very limited time in each room, and Evil Otto starts showing up. So that just reminded me. I don't think I thought of the guy's name for Venture. His name was Winky. And I'm like, that's a little weird, Winky. But hey, they used to name the characters back then. But back to Berzerk, you know, you can do a lot worse. Now, they've made more modern versions of this for 2600 where they've added voice in, which is really pretty impressive, but that requires extra components and stuff like that. But either way, this still had the heart of the game in here, and you felt like you were playing Berzerk. Even though the characters are a little larger, it still felt really good to play this game. So Phoenix is, I believe this one was at the bowling alley where I probably played it the most. This is another one that could have been in, say, Goliath's Arcade. I do remember more of this being at the bowling alley. And because it was there, I might not have played it as much because Space Invaders is okay, you know, and then everything's kind of a better version, you know, Galaga, Galaxian, all that stuff. Just try to improve on the Space Invaders where things are coming down. And this one's a bit more frantic because at least there's like a boss character on this. You've got like a couple waves of different styles of enemies coming at you, and then you've got this boss character where you've got to shoot through their defense to get to them inside of their big spaceship, which is tough as hell because those bullets just come so frantically at you. But that's what makes this game good, and especially if you're playing on something like the Atari 2600, this captures the feel of it very well, of the arcade, and because you're not having to pump in quarters, you don't stress and you just enjoy the gameplay as difficult as it is. And this is one of those ones where it's just driven by getting a high score. So there we go. Phoenix is pretty solid arcade port in my book. And it also gets another thumbs up. All right, here we have a Defender, which is, it's okay. It's not bad. I could see getting used to it after time. There's a lot of flicker with Defender, you know, so you really gotta you really got to just push that aside because your ship's flickering, the aliens are flickering, the map up top is flickering. So it's just, they improved it with Stargate, or Defender 2 they called it. But the first Defender on here, again, they were learning the tricks of the trade with the Atari, how they could improve things, get less flicker, get more characters on there. So this being a little bit of a hectic game and the speed sometimes and flying around, it still is a darn good port, because when you look at the Defender layout, there's a lot of buttons out there. And the one thing I couldn't figure out, I had to look this up during my gameplay. I'm like, wait a minute, how do I do this? I even hooked up a second joystick because I thought, oh, maybe I've got to use the button on the second joystick for my smart bombs. But what it was is you're supposed to fly down into the city area down below where you can hide behind the buildings a little bit. And then if you push the button down there, it'll set off your smart bomb. So there's a tip to everybody. But it's so not as easy to use your smart bomb when you're just in the middle of a bunch of crap and you just got to clear it out. You got to get down to the bottom and use it. But again, this was pretty early in arcade ports for the Atari, so they did a good job. And you do get used to the flickering after a while, but there's a lot, so just be warned. But it's still pretty fun and hectic. So Solar Fox here is an arcade port that I discovered was an arcade port. It just sounded like one, and I thought maybe it is. So I looked it up and I'm like, yeah, Solar Fox definitely was an arcade port. I've never seen it in the arcades in my life. This is another one of those rare games where I've just never seen it out in the wild. But Solar Fox is pretty neat. Now, I think there's an option to shoot if I'm recalling the gameplay. And you don't have that in this, or at least I couldn't figure out how to shoot. But you could adjust your speed. And while I thought it seemed a little mundane at first, well, as I played a little more, I found out, well, you get bonus levels too that you got to clear, which is pretty neat. So that changes it up. And then once you get up to a certain level, it kind of is like the Q-Bert idea where you have to go over things a couple times. And these little items you run over, eventually you've got to run over them 2 or 3 times. So it makes the game much trickier that, you got to really plan out and remember where you were so you can finish the level as quick as possible. So that gives it replayability where you can improve on your skills. Not having anything to compare it to, I found it fun, but then even comparing it to what I saw for gameplay of the real arcade, it's pretty close. Now, I don't know what the shooting deal is. Maybe I'm missing something. I looked up the manual, I didn't really see it, but I guess it's not a heavy component anyway. So I feel like that gets a pass, and that's sometimes they had to have some cutbacks on things. Again, you only have one button to deal with on here, so you got to take something out. Were they going to take out the shooting, or were they going to take out the speed? And I think the right option was taking the shooting out, because the speed really helps you zip around to clear a board quicker. So, Solar Fox, hey, I was impressed with this. I started having fun. I thought it was kind of crappy at first, but as I played it more and more, I started having a good time. And then when I was like, wow, they're making the levels harder and harder, this gets pretty exciting and hectic. And I was like, wait a minute, this is actually a good game. So there you go. Who knows? Maybe someone, not me, but another one that's a thumbs up. So as usual, I'm going to 11 on this one. And I was going to play some other stuff. You might have saw Circus Atari sitting out there, but I was like, you know what? I got a bunch of arcade paddle games that I want to kind of clump together. So I'm going to do all those, and it's going to be easier to record if I just plug the paddle in and I do all those games in order and actually use the paddles. But I scrapped Circus Atari in favor of a more modern arcade port, and that's Ladybug. And this isn't Ladybug Arcade, because they've even improved on this more to make it more just like the arcade. But this is Ladybug, the first rendition they made of a port, which feels more like an Atari game that could have been, because it's not an exact port of the game. So I really enjoy this game. This is one of my favorite games back in the day in the early arcades, because this was taking the Pac-Man idea and making it more fun. you have to move nonstop. The ladybug just won't keep going if you go in a straight line. If you let off the left or right, it's going to stop in its place. So you have that control. And these monsters chase you around the maze. Now, you got to get all the dots to clear the board, but there's other things to do. There's little bonus multipliers on here, hearts, and depending on what color they are, as you see the time ticking around the maze, that's when the monsters come out. But during that time, you get different colors. I think it's blue, yellow, and red or something. And the blue, I think, adds to the multipliers more if you get the hearts. Yellow is the letters you want to get for the extra man or extra ladybug. And the red are the colors you want to get for the special, which, if I'm not forgetting, this is one of the few games like Mr. Do where you could get an extra game. So I think special gives you an extra game if you spell it out. I haven't done it in a while, and I definitely haven't played it, the arcade version, so don't quote me on that. And I know I'm saying Mr. Do, and people might think Mr. Do doesn't have, it's just an extra man for Mr. Do too, but there is the option, and I did it once at the bowling alley. Mr. Do was also at the bowling alley eventually. And what happened was, and I never got to it, and I didn't know what it was, I was playing, and a bunch of apples fell at one time. And when they hit, and I don't know if this is in the Atari version, and it just gives you points or something, but when they hit, they split open, and a diamond was there, and I was just like, holy crap, what was that diamond? And I never saw it again. And it wasn't until the internet was around years later that I discovered that the diamond in Mr. Do gives you an extra game. You can win a game. And there's very few arcade games that were like pinball where you could win an extra game. I don't know. If someone out there knows of others beyond Mr. Do and Ladybug, let me know. But again, I started playing this version of Ladybug and I couldn't stop. So you're going to get to see the whole gameplay, which wasn't the best game in the world, but I couldn't stop, so I'm just letting it go. And I got to the point where I was like, oh, I just want to get the extra ladybug. So this has so many facets to it. It's just and this is not a well-known game. And it was never released for the Atari. It was released for the ColecoVision, and some people might remember it from there, but it's not an arcade game that a lot of people, I think, know about. But it was so fun. I would play this every time I went to Goliath's arcade, and I would play it several times because I got good enough where I could have a quarter that would last me, maybe 10, 15 minutes for gameplay. And when you're a little kid, you want to make the most out of that quarter. And this was a game I could do that with. And it got really hard as you got up in the higher levels. And that felt good to just get a little better every time. So this is probably out of print right now. I don't even know if you can get a copy of this. So I'm super psyched that I bought this. I didn't buy any others over the years. There's so many I wanted to, but they're like $50, 30, 40, $50 for some of these versions. They're well worth it, don't get me wrong. I'm just cheap now as I'm getting older, unless it's a deal or it's got to be the most amazing thing that I want. I'm not going to spend the extra money on it. And, that's just the way things have gotten as I've gotten older. It's like, you know what? If a game comes out, I'm not spending $70 on it anymore. I got more than enough stuff in my backlog to play until that game comes down in price to something more reasonable, which lets me just buy more games, which also just creates more of a backlog. So is it smart? I don't know. I'm just, trying to spend less money as time goes on. But I'm getting a little sidetracked here. Let's get back to this. So again, Ladybug, while not an original Atari game back from the 80s, I just wanted to throw this one in as a little bonus so people could see how impressive the makers of modern ports are for even a system like the Atari 2600. And I think you'll probably start seeing more of that as Atari now has kind of been rebranding themselves. They've been bought by new ownership in the last few years, and they're starting to buy up other intellectual properties, and they're putting out systems, and they're starting to get some programmers some of the homebrew programmers working for him, some of the old school programmers from, say, Activision working for him. It's probably one of the very most exciting times to get into Atari since way back there in the late 70s and early 80s. So there you go. There's another 11 arcade ports for the Atari 2600. I got one more in me, and then after that, I'm kind of out of games, even though there's probably twice as many. I think I've looked it up, and there's probably another 40 games out there that I don't own. But, again, you only got so much time and so much money, and you do with what you got, and you do what you can. So, hey, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time. So long.